Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Smudcast number 694, Trope Talk, Unreliable Narrators. Yes, we're covering another video by Red. Only, 14 minutes? Yeah, it's not too bad. And I was just talking about the concept of an unreliable narrator. It's basically first person limited. It's just one guy. He's describing a thing. In the next chapter, there's another narrator, or he discovers what the thing is, and he was wrong in the first chapter. So that could piss people off. Sometimes it's a plot reveal or like a murder mystery. It's like, oh, I didn't know that was going to happen. And there's all kinds of examples I can give you. I think my latest book I read that uses a first-person view is Never Let Me Go. I'm trying to remember the author. It was a Japanese dude. Kazuo Ishiguro? Something like that. Kazuo. Anyway, it's basically a world where people are born to be donors. They're organ donors. And there's this whole system in place so that people who get sick, their clone is running around in the real world somewhere, and they're the rich. And we know this. This is not I'm not like spoiling the narrative for you. This is just how the premise starts off. And the girl tells us, the main character girl tells us what the world is like. And then when she leaves the school she's in, she then is revealed to the rest of the world and all the politics involved and what that means. And it's like, oh, then that's when the narration just goes boom. And you're like, wow, I did not know there was more to this world than that. So that's kind of the big twist of the story. And I didn't tell you what the twist was, but there's all this stuff happening that you're unaware of. That's a classical example of a unreliable narrator going from first person with the character, and the character goes out into the world and experiences the world and goes, oh my God, I've left the cave. The world is bigger than I thought. So it goes from this teen drama story to just, whoop, politics, gaboom. So simple stuff. There's other examples. I think the most complicated I could think of is Dostoevsky's last book, which is The Brothers Karamazov. And everyone who's studying literature would know that book. There's been all kinds of essays written about that narrative style. It's more than just, if she brings that up, I'd be impressed. That would be like, wow, she actually read that. So
no, she doesn't read books.
Dostoevsky. Okay.
Dostoevsky is like a very niche author anyway.
He's amazing. I mean, if you really like writing and reading, and Russian authors specifically, he's the guy to read next to Nabokov, but he is really up there. And that was his last book. It took 2 years to make, so he's a busy guy getting that published. And wow, what a crazy philosophical book. And if you're into reading, that's the one you should go for. Okay, anyway, I've been rambling enough, and you're going to hear a lot more rambling from someone else, so we should get started.
Every story with a narrator has a narrative voice. In simple terms, it's the tone and approach taken by the narration, which is basically all the parts of the story that aren't dialogue or inner monologue. Scene setting, physical descriptions, the actions a character takes, all these things make up the narrative voice of a typical prose story. The simplest thing to nail down about it is whether it's in first, second, or third person. A first-person narrative voice talks in terms of I and we and me, taking the explicit role of a character in the story, retelling events that happened to them. A second-person narrative voice is more rare, talking in terms of you and yours, taking the role of an observer, describing the actions of the person they're dealing with. A third-person narrative voice is probably the most common, using they and them and he and her to describe the actions of the characters from a wholly externalized perspective. A second or third-person narration essentially implies the existence of a narrator character, intangible and unobservable.
It just feels like a description is like how a robot sees human beings. Like they use he, she, or they pronouns to describe the events that are currently happening.
This is like stuff you learned in grade school. It's very simple.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep. It's nothing to argue about. So let's just keep going.
Observable of its voice ends. For one thing, these implied spectator mode narrator characters have varying levels of omniscience, how much they actually know about the story and can communicate to the audience. Limited is...
Wait, okay. Okay, that's not incorrect. The way she worded it didn't make sense to me, but fine. Let's go.
Field of view. The narrative voice is limited. characters to the POV character's own observations. For instance, a third-person limited narrator might volunteer that the POV character is feeling tired or scared, but when discussing a different character, the narrator will only volunteer that the POV character thinks they're putting on a brave face. Objective is the narrative equivalent of a wide shot. This narrator doesn't have close-in access to anyone's thoughts and motivations and will instead simply narrate their actions in dialogue, leaving the audience to infer how they're feeling and why they're doing the things that they're doing. And finally, omniscient is a narrative voice that knows what everyone is thinking and feeling, and can freely switch perspectives between different characters to show what anyone and everyone is feeling about the story. This might seem like a lot of trouble for a character that doesn't even really exist. Narration is invisible, the glue that holds prose storytelling together, because otherwise it would just be scripted dialogue and stage directions. Narration is how the story describes itself, and because there's no way for language to be completely neutral and objective, the
Well, okay.
describes this.
I think she got the objective descriptor wrong. The objective, a narrator knows everything. That's kind of the point of omniscient. I don't know why she broke that down.
Yeah.
So I was like, wait a second, was that right? And I thought about that. I was like, that doesn't sound right. So
The moment she started to categorize them, it's like, does it really, can it really be categorized like that? Because like I thought like it's more like the style of the book.
well, style is when you have like the first person and they have a certain way of talking and
Oh yeah, but can the narrator like have like some edge to itself as
yeah,
well?
I mean, you could have an omniscient narrator who's like a little goofy or a little silly if you're doing a comedy. But whenever you say objective narrator, you're saying an omniscient. Like that's it. You don't need to have objective omniscient. Like that doesn't make any sense.
Story they're with implicitly creates a characterization. Saying a character said something and saying they hissed or murmured or managed or yelled or shrieked.
That's just the mannerisms of the writer, not the mannerisms of the narrator. This is what we talk about when we say to be a writer, you have to have certain mannerisms you grew up with. And that's how you learned how to speak, how to talk to other people. You pick this up really early on. So that even if you read books and philosophers and, I don't know, you go to a school to learn how to speak, this is your natural voice that you're going to use these terms. And that does pull into like Mark Twain or any of these other authors that have a certain twang to their voice or a certain dialect. It will come out regardless, even if it's omniscient a viewpoint. So you can't eliminate the human element of the narrator unless you're really robotic and completely factual.
All feel different and mean different things and imply different things about the character they're describing, and thus indirectly imply things about the narrator holding that opinion. A supposedly distant narrator might describe a character as beautiful or repulsive or terrifying or irresistibly attractive, with the implication that these opinions must be universally held because they're being stated by a character that's supposed to be neutral, despite the fact that these are subjective assessments that would vary from character to character and audience to audience. If a writer isn't careful about this, the narrator can end up as an unintentional and invisible author self-insert, giving the writer's unfiltered.
That's fine. There's nothing wrong with the omniscient saying this is a beautiful creature or this is a beautiful woman. And we don't need to know why that is. They go into detail usually describing something that's attractive to them. So that's fine, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. That's just how the style of the writer works and how they want the audience to know that this is an attractive person or this is an attractive car because it's blonde and beautiful and big and has a 240 horsepower engine or something, whatever.
Perhaps revealing implicit biases or blind spots. This is a feature and not a bug. A completely neutral narrator, if such a thing could even exist, would be distant and sterile and make the story needlessly difficult to parse. The fact is, the narrator is a character, and that character has a voice. And while some stories make that explicit by having the narrator be one of the named characters recounting the story from their perspective, some story formats make this less obvious, and the characterization of the narrator is really only demonstrated in the specific ways they choose to describe the plot and characters. The narrative voice has opinions and biases and finds certain things funny or worth pointing out, while others might be glossed over as irrelevant. In a medium with a narrator, the narrator becomes a lens through which the audience experiences the thoughts and actions of every other character.
No, the lens is something else. You say a lens to a narrator. A narrator is saying, look at the world. I'm giving it to you like this. It's not, here's a tray. Use the lens to look at the tray. It's like, no, here's the tray. I can describe the tray. I can say it's a silver tray, it's a platter, it's got meat on it, it's delicious. Or I could say, I really hate the salami on this silver tray that I'm showing you. I don't even know why you're getting into like a comedy routine. You're getting into a mode. So
Yeah.
it's not necessary to do that unless you're talking about, I think she showed Terry Pratchett, or I could bring up Ian M. Banks when he talks about science fiction, and at the end of one of his books, he's sort of like, hey, I was there. I was really there. Would I lie to you? Like stuff like quirky little silly things like that to make you go, what? But that's generally speaking what you don't want to do. You want to keep things omniscient, third person, clear as day. The style of your writing. So do you have long, big descriptive sentences? Do you have short ones like bullets that pum, 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 that come at you really quickly and get the scene going quickly? So it's more about pacing, how you digest the ideas, and whether the writer is using like a compound sentence, like an adjective, noun, adjective, adjective, like there's too many descriptors. It's like she's beautiful and gorgeous and sexy and she smells like, it's like, whoa, you're going too much. Like just give me one thing, one sense, and then she looks good, she smells good, she walks well, she's 6'2", she's tall, she's a model, blah, 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 blah. Like, okay, we got it. She's a knockout. And you could just say, she's a knockout, she's a model. She's a knockout model, done. Adjective, noun, done. So it's how fast the pacing of the narration goes. That's the main issue. Not, I'm going to focus on this key element. And this is the problem with writers. If they do that, you're drawing attention to something, and the audience goes, "Oh, I should be looking at that because that's what you're talking about," and then it's never brought up again, or doesn't mean anything. That's the problem. So if she means focusing on something like a lens on, I don't know, the model's hair, and it's never brought up again, don't do that. Don't waste my time.
I would love, I think, I'm sorry that I interrupted, but like if she could bring up examples.
Yeah, that'd be helpful.
But it's like all of these are so generalized. I just don't know what to make of it.
Yeah, I don't like this concept of, like, we use lenses for very specific reasons because we have listened to so many videos of people using lenses to analyze an open primary source or a work or a movie or whatever. That's the term you would use. You would not use a lens for a narrator. I would use the term like a window. It's a view into the world. That's why I use for a title. Like the title is the sentence or the word that gives you that sort of look out into the world that you might be reading. And then when you read it, the author is describing the window and what you see out of it in a big, big detail. So I just don't like her use of the word lens. I think I know what she's saying, but as soon as you say lens, that means you're focusing on one thing. And I'm like, what are you using to focus? Is it a political lens? Is it a dramatic lens? Are you filtering anything? That's not what necessarily narrators do. Narrators are just there to tell you everything. And if they're limited, then it's not an omniscient narrator. So you're going back to the first person. So it's like, okay. Anyway.
Which means, on the most basic and technical level, every narrator is an unreliable narrator. A theoretically perfectly reliable narrator would explain absolutely everything that's happening, so the audience...
No, they wouldn't.
Why would they be...
That's the stupid response to saying everyone's unlimited, even the omniscient third person, because there's not enough paper in the world. And you're like, what? Okay.
Well, should they spoil the events of the book? Oh, why?
Yeah, this is like going into the forensic detail of everything. Like, you don't have to do that.
Oh.
Can you imagine how annoying that would be? Just constant data. It's 5'2", and every time he inhales, he increases his height by to 5'3", and you're like, oh.
It reminds me of those scenes from Bucky when they just completely cut off to some history lesson. Like in 1971, they have invented this in Japan in a small lab.
Yeah.
It's
like, thanks.
Nobody cares. That's not the point.
Yeah.
As you well put it, like it would put too much attention on like a detail that nobody cares about.
Plus, that
which is impossible, because at bare minimum, and broadly, it would just take way too long. There will always be room for confusion and interpretation.
How the hell does this video have 500,000 views?
Yeah, there will always be room for confusion and interpretation. So don't write crap. Don't waste our time. Don't like, this is something you can drive your car on one full tank of gas, and you could drive it all the way into the gas station, and then you could keep the engine going and fill up that tank and keep going, and you could just keep driving that car all the way. But no one's going to do that. No one is going to keep driving and driving and driving and driving, and when you buy a car, it's not going to happen. So why would we even consider doing that?
These kind of gas prices now.
I'm still hung up on the whole every narrator is unreliable thing.
Yeah, that is
like that makes no sense. It's like, so don't trust any book you read ever?
Yeah.
Yes, don't.
Can you imagine some murder mysteries where like Watson is just like, but that didn't happen that way. I was talking bullshit for 90% of the story. It's like, what?
Yeah, you read Sherlock Holmes and it's like the ending to Clue, the movie Clue, where it's like, that's what could have happened, but here's what really happened.
Or maybe it ended like that was great because it was so funny, and it was like, yeah, okay. It's not about who did it. It's really about, was it fun? What could have happened that way in a funny way? Like the guy's like, I'm going to go home and sleep with my wife. You're like, what? What the hell? Anyway.
Yeah.
Baseline background radiation of unreliability, there are many ways for a narrator to be notably unreliable. It's generally expected that a narrator or POV character is being honest and correct about what's happening, at least to the extent of their ability to understand.
You know what's like an unreliable narration in a story? The Last Jedi. But like it kept like destroying my expectations, even though like the movie kept established, or even better, like Ryan Johnson movie is like his latest one. What's that murder mystery that he did?
Glass Onion or whatever it's called.
Yes, Glass Onion. Because like the first time when some of the scenes were shown, the flashbacks of those scenes have a completely different perspective where some extra characters are also appearing in them, or like things that are happening as well, and that is unreliable because that's breaking the immersion.
I was going to suggest the movie The Usual Suspects. That's a great example of unreliable narrator. I mean, once you get to the end, you realize the narrator is unreliable.
Not true. Most mediums of storytelling don't have narrators because most of them don't need narrators. In prose writing, the narrator is the only way for the story to set the stage, paint the picture of the setting for the audience, tell us how the characters look and act.
I'm saying dialogue, she said coldly. It's how I communicate my thoughts to the audience. This was only partly true, she mused. Narration also provided a brief glimpse into her rich inner world. She carded her fingers through her hair, then stamped in frustration, this would be simpler in a visual medium.
Okay. Red should never be a rhyme.
This is silly. Don't use this as examples. I don't think I'd ever seen an English professor write stuff like that.
I wrote shit like this when I was 10.
Well, you know, she's narrating this video, so therefore she's an unreliable narrator. just saying, you know, I mean, we're just going off of what she's saying here.
Limited first-person perspective. She might be wrong, yes.
Communicate information to the audience that the characters themselves. The character is a redhead with green eyes and freckles. Unless that character feels like saying those things out loud, it's going to have to come through from the narrator. This stops being true as soon as a visual element is introduced to the story. So comics, picture books, shows, and movies don't need narration, and in fact often suffer from its inclusion.
So we went from prose to, well, all of a sudden we don't need that. It's like, yeah, but even comics need to describe what the hell we're looking at. It's like, oh, look at this wilderness. It's like, where are we? What's the time frame? What are we trying to do? You can't just have visual medium solves all the problems of description. That's not how comic books work.
Because audio narration can feel like a clumsy and abstract way to communicate plot beats in a visual medium. Without a narrator, it might seem difficult to have an unreliable narrator. But even in stories...
Without a narrator, it might seem difficult to have an What? Without a narrator... I'm trying to wrap my brain around this one. So if you don't have a narrator, it might be difficult to have another narrator. What?
Yes.
Without an orange, it might be difficult to have a Florida orange. Like, what are you talking about? How does that make sense? Without a car, it's hard to have a Ferrari. It's like, what?
You can't have unreliable narration or an unreliable narrative, which is good because otherwise it would be really hard for me to put visual examples in this video.
Okay, so the example I always give for a narrator or a narration which is lying to the audience in a visual medium because you're not using the narrator, there's about 4 I use. Tale of Two Sisters, The Fight Club, what's the other one? The two Night Shyamalan movie, the one with the ghost that Bruce Willis. Can't remember it.
Sixth Sense.
Sixth Sense.
Sixth Sense. Because of optics, there's all kinds of optic lies they give you. And Memento, where they visually lie to the audience, and that's what pisses me off. Because if you're going to give me, because I assume the camera is just a camera. It's an imaginary eyeball that just hovers in the air, and events play out in different sequences like a Memento. But those films lie to you. So that's where I draw the line. It's like, wait a second. Why did you do that to us? And then, of course, there's Fight Club is a bunch of stupid shit with like frames that are like, they throw in, like, there's like 4 or 5 frames in the film where they just put Brad Pitt in there for the hell of it.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, the sudden flashes.
Yeah, I wasn't even aware of that. I saw one. I was like, what is that? Like my eye was flickering or something? But it happened like several times. I never paid attention to it. But every time a movie lies to you, that means the narration or the narrative is lying to you as well. So that's the problem I have with those techniques, because I do not want to be lied to. I want a third-person view of a camera, not a first-person view with a third-person camera. I don't want that, because then I just wasted all my time past 10 minutes, and that happens a lot in A Tale of Two Sisters, which is totally pissed me off at the end, because I thought, oh, this is what the story's about. It's about these 2 girls, blah, 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 blah. And then at the end, you're like, oh, that's stupid. It just it gets you so angry because they were lying to you the entire time. So,
well, I think it's okay to lie to somebody through a story, but you need a good payoff at the end of it. You know, like we were lying to keep this hidden from you, but you need a really good payoff.
I gotta see an example of that, because I can't see why you'd ever want to lie to the audience in a third-person view. It just doesn't make sense. I can understand a murder mystery where everyone's lying, like everyone says a lie because they all have a motive to kill the guy, and you don't know who's who. And that's part of the point, is to figure out in your own head who's lying and what they're lying about. So that's fair. But when you're giving me these art pieces like Memento, which is an art piece, and Tale of Two Sisters, which is this artsy-fartsy movie, and you're like, okay, whatever. And you're like, oh, does Bruce Willis have like corporeal space? Does he have atoms? Does he cast shadows? Does he generate sound through his mouth? I thought he did. The camera and the lighting showed me he did. And he was walking down the stairs. He doesn't actively open doors. He doesn't touch things, but he sits down. So he must be sitting down on a chair. So he has atoms. Like, it's that sort of annoying lie that my brain, like, you just take it for granted because you didn't think any differently. There's no reason to. But then they go, no, you're not real. And you're like, what? Excuse me?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty easy to like go back and like, you know, comb through the footage, and it's like, okay, this moment here, I was lied to, you know, like looking back on it, like, yeah, I can understand, like, it's like, how did I miss all of this, you know, like, sort of thing. But I think like when you're in the moment, it's like you don't really notice that sort of thing unless you know about the twist, and I'm using quotations, finger quotations, the twist in advance, you know, so that way you pay attention, you know, more intently. It's like, okay, that's where I was lied to. Like that's where Bruce Willis, you know, talked to somebody and they didn't answer, you know, or they gave like a vague answer, the person he was talking to.
Yeah,
you know,
and this is key because when I pay attention to interpretations or adaptations of murder mysteries like Agatha Christie, there are scenes where it's like, oh, that's a key bit of information we should write down. Like she is the fourth generation heiress of this family, even though it just said like in a normal conversation, you're like, oh, that's because if you know anything about murder mysteries, it's always about where does the line of inheritance go and who's going to die to direct that money somewhere else. So as soon as you figure that out, you're like, oh, she's going to get killed, or she did this all for the money. So it's like suspect number one or potential victim number two. So that's one of those key things you try to remember in murder mysteries that you pick up as you go. And for them to lie about that stuff is what we call going up the garden path, which is fair, or being led astray. There's a red herring. That's fine. But with visual media, that's a whole other ball game, and that's where I put my foot down. So
Reliable narrator in a non-prose medium is tell a story. This character thus takes on the role of a first-person narrator for the benefit of the other characters in the story. This can be a framing sequence for an entire movie or a full episode of a show, where the story begins with a character starting their story and ends shortly after they finish. Maybe the characters are all sharing ghost stories around a campfire, or someone is being interrogated by the authorities about what they did for a recent heist or crime, or the characters are reading through another character's diary, or a movie opens with narration from an unseen, much older version of one of the characters we're about to meet, or maybe several characters are all weighing in on their side of a big story, Rashomon style. In these scenarios, the characters can all be expected to be biased by their personal eccentricities, and that means the writer can get a lot of mileage out of letting every character tell the story unreliably in a way that makes sense for them.
that's fine, but it's not about the eccentricities. It's about the knowledge they possess, whether it's true or false. The style is eccentricities and the method, and that's how we identify with the character. That's why, if you want to understand that, read Brothers Karamazov, where the narrator is saying, well, I'm a writer and I'm not the hero of the story. But then he integrates with the thoughts of the other characters. You're like, wait a second, is this third person or first person? It's very fascinating to read. So people who are good at writing can do shit like that and get away with it, like Dostoevsky. But if you try to do it another way, it's not going to work too hotly. So.
They're evil or cruel or otherwise hilariously out of character. A prideful egotist might tell a story where they're the heroic champion that single-handedly saved the day by fighting off a truly implausible number of bad guys. A villain might cast themselves as the victim. A parent might censor the swear words and steamy bits of a story they're telling their kid. A child's version of a story is liable to be a bit more unfocused than an adult's. This is a way to reinforce characterization while also giving the audience a fun mystery to puzzle through. What parts of the story are true? What parts are exaggerated? What really happened? In cases where only one character is telling the story, so we can't cross-reference with anyone else's version, we're often directed to take them at their word for the bulk of the runtime, only for doubt to be cast on them at the very end for a fun twist reveal. Maybe the happy ending they described was wishful thinking, or the story is revealed to be an elaborate lie. Broadly, there are three ways narrators can be unreliable. The first and most obvious is if they are lying liars. These narrators will flat out deceive characters and audience.
Oh, God. I can't remember what this is called, but it's a joke to say, verb, noun. That's the same, like one-to-one.
Yeah, this is where you need examples. Like in this instance right here. Like, give us an example of like what's that? Lying liars.
Yeah, I do not like this. This was a joke in Chrono Cross with Salt and Pepper, These two baffling mini bosses that get stronger as the game goes on, and I think it was Salt is the one who makes these stupid mannerisms where he says, "We're amazingly amazing," and it's like, what? What are you talking about? So anyone who uses this seriously, they're trying to be funny or they're dumb. I don't know why you would ever say something like this.
Or leaving out key information, like for instance, it's intentionally misrepresenting the story, but they don't really understand what's going on, so their version of events might skip past key details they've missed and be broadly not very useful. This is most common in story-within-a-story settings because it can easily be played for comedy if the narrator chooses to focus on a seemingly incidental detail while extremely significant things are happening in the background. And the third type is hallucinatory. These narrators are also not intentionally misrepresenting the story most of the time, but their actual perception of reality is unreliable because the way they perceive their surroundings is not how they're really happening. This works quite well in visual mediums because the camera can show what the character is perceiving with subtle hints that it's not exactly bound by physical laws or shot continuity. Unreliable narration can also be used for dramatic irony if the character narrates a situation playing out one way while the audience sees it play out differently, presumably how it really happened, giving the audience information that the characters hearing the story don't have. A character might describe themselves as totally in control of their life while the camera treacherously reveals them to be a hot mess. In contrast, a character might also describe themselves as lame or uncool or broadly disliked, only for the objective POV to show them surrounded by people who like and value them, and only their insecurities are making them tell the story that way. This is again used to highlight the character and their unique traits. The way they tell a story tells us something useful about this character, how their own perceptions color reality, and how honest they're willing to be with themselves or the people around.
Good lord, yes, first person, we get it.
Around them. This is very useful stuff, but the versions we've been discussing have all been safely compartmentalized in a story within a story and used for the purpose of highlighting a character's unique wackiness in the way they specifically see the world and tell their story. In these scenarios, we typically trust that the camera outside that story within a story is still going to be honest with us about what's really.
The camera? What is she talking about?
I don't know.
I don't know.
The camera outside of these stories is still going to be honest. Does that mean narrator? Just say narrator.
Yeah.
Are we
But if she would use narrator, then like that would be 101st time of saying that in the video.
Yeah, is she still talking about books or is she talking about movies? Like, I don't.
So far, like she has been talking about movies.
Okay. Yeah.
Going on. This is not always true, and that's where things can start getting complicated. When an unreliable narrator has control over the entire story, things start getting dicey. In general, an audience will start a story trusting that.
What does it mean to have an unreliable narrator in control of?
But like the crawling text in Star Wars is probably a reliable narrator because like they are just objective facts that they are saying there. How can it be an unreliable narrator?
Yeah. When they say weird stuff like the dead can speak or whatever the episode.
Yeah. They got really weird and like the heroes on both sides in Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah, it's kind of like this. It feels like a 40s radio show announcer. He's like saying,
Yes.
"Tune in next week when the death of the Superman is coming back to haunt the world of Metropolis, and what will happen?" Like, whoa, what the hell? Like, it's this bombastic sort of amazing stuff, and you're like, oh my god, this is crazy. I can't wait to see it in the serialization of Star Wars. So it's done for effect, to get you up to speed, whether it's text on the screen, and we see that in video games all the time. First 10 seconds sometimes of a game you start. Gives you a little history lesson, and boom, you're in.
Yeah.
Isn't telling them everything, even in from the really juicy reveals, but the audience generally trusts that what they're seeing is what's really happening. They don't go into a story assuming the story is going to lie to them. However, there are ways a writer can clue in the audience that they should start being suspicious. Maybe characters are acting strangely or inconsistently, or backgrounds are shifting in ways that don't make sense, or continuity errors are cropping up between shots. An audience might begin to get suspicious, and will generally have those suspicions confirmed fairly soon after the evidence piles up. The suspicious scene might be revealed to be a dream, or a simulation, or a hallucination, or somebody's mind palace, or a brief glimpse into an alternate timeline, or any number of plot-based hand-wavy justifications the writers can use to briefly bait and switch the audience with an impossible or deeply unlikely scenario. This can be a lot of fun, but it has a detrimental effect on audience investment in the long term. If they've already done the nightmare sequence or the holodeck training program trick enough times, the audience might start feeling broadly unworried when a situation looks particularly perilous, because it's even odds it's not even really happening. This means when it turns out to actually be happening, the audience has to play catch-up on their investment, and unfortunately, if the audience has picked up on clever clues that the scenario was fake, like the writing making no sense or continuity errors in the shot, that goes from being very cool and smart writing to subtly hint that the events aren't really happening, to the unfortunate realization that it's actually just bad writing and poor set management. It's a risky trope to overuse because it hits with less punch
It's not a trope. What are you talking about? This is not in the narrative. This is the scope and framing of the narrative.
So this is the trope. Like she finally said the words.
It's not a.
Is this what it was building up to?
It's not a trope.
According to her.
Yeah, no. This is like saying you're using I don't know, a romantic mode or first person perspective. Perspective's not a trope. I've never heard it characterized that way. Maybe it is, but I've never seen that sort of like whenever you read a story, you immediately are clued into, oh, okay, Bob is telling me the story from his perspective, or there is a no-name narrator and he has the viewpoint of a god, and that's immediately third-person omniscient. Like we immediately go to that in our brains. We don't say, oh, this is a technique, this is a pattern in storytelling. No, this is not a pattern. This is how the entire story is going to go. It's kind of like saying, oh, I read from left to right. It's like, yeah, that's how you read English. Other cultures read right to left. It's like, yeah, it's not a trope.
every time, and non-fake plot. Of course, a good and fun thing for any audience to do, but
Let me rewind
it's
that.
with less punch every time, and diminishes the punch of the actual non-fake plot twist.
The punch of the actual non-fake plot twists.
Where does the camera go, though?
Just say plot twists.
Yeah.
Just say the non-fake plot. What are we when would you have to think that a plot twist is fake within a narrative where there's where you suddenly like when I look at A Tale of Two Sisters, that only happens after the reveal, and you go, wait a second, what the hell was I watching? What was fake? But the reveal is not fake. The plot twist is not fake. That sort of changes the whole perspective of the movie. What is she talking about?
I don't know.
Just bad writing and poor set management. Punch of the actual non-fake for clues, which is of course a good and fun thing for any audience to do, but it can be a bit disheartening for the writer regardless. But of course, one easy way to avoid that issue is to tell only one self-contained story, like a
Why is it disheartening for the writer? It just means that like the writer didn't do a good job.
Yeah, and to imply that you should be looking for clues in a story that's not a mystery is dumb. That's like saying, "Oh, well, you should have been paying attention to the narrator. He was lying." It's like, well, there was no indication of that. Why should I bother? I thought this was.
I'm still laughing at this unreliable, objective narrative.
Yeah, oh, by the way, the last chapter was a lie. It's like, what? What are you talking? Like, why would you ever say that to your audience? You know,
oopsie.
I remember once I've talked about this book like in the past. It's a supernatural kind of dark comedy book called Johann Cabal, and it's written in a narrative. And one of the stories ended on kind of like a happy kind of sort of ending, and the narrator, the author at the end says, "Okay, that's it. The story's done. Don't go any further past this page." And then if you flip the page, the author is like, "Fine, I warned you. Keep going." And then you keep reading, and it's like a slightly ominous ending at the end of it. It's like, okay, it's like that's interesting. You know,
Oh.
it's like I could have stopped, but I kept reading, and now the author's like, yeah, that's fine. I told you to stop.
Yeah, I think Harlan Ellison does that with his preface in his Deathbird stories, where he's like, "There's going to be a test at the end of this book. Make sure you take notes." Blah 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 blah. You know, he's goofing around, obviously, but it's just that some of his stories are serious. Some of them tell a retelling of Jesus Christ as Prometheus and his gay lover being chained to a rock. Like, it's like he just does crazy stuff that make you think about religion differently. Then he actually has a joke about religion story, which is just, it's the stupidest story in the whole book, where a bunch of gargoyles just come alive from New York and just murder everyone. Like, it's it's literally, that's this whole story. Is this scene, this gargoyle comes down from this building and slaughters a bunch of Muslims, and then this scene, this girl comes down and just kills a bunch of nuns. And you're just like, what the hell am I reading? So
yeah,
he does some weird stuff, but all his stories are awesome. But except for that one.
One self-contained book or movie, and having that turn out to be an unreliable narrative, because that means that there aren't later installments for the audience to disbelieve. One relatively common way this plays out is a reveal near the end of the story that the POV character has been hallucinating for large portions of it, and whole scenes didn't happen or didn't play out the way they thought they did. Or a character's memories have specifically been tinkered with, and any flashbacks and recollections they had aren't what they seemed to be. These reveals usually hit late in the game and make a lot more sense on a second viewing, where the audience can be on the lookout for particular.
What is this?
Captain Marvel had that.
I don't think that was a good example.
That is like the biggest like cinematic masterpieces of the ages.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
So I'm assuming she's trying to draw a straight line, and she just drew a line in her mouse. And it's prior events in the story twist, and then you go back, new interpretations, given new info. Okay, so when you get the twist in Sixth Sense, I don't know about you, but I got pissed off. I was like, wait a second. That doesn't make sense. Everything that I was shown and told and heard was he was a person, and he was trying to figure stuff out. Not that he was a ghost talking to no one, and no one could see him or hear him. It just throws everything out the door, and you're like, okay, this is stupid. Anyway.
Exciting hint. Of course, once you establish the idea that the POV character's perceptions can't be trusted, on a certain level, that's kinda game over. For the purposes of this story, the audience can no longer be convinced that anything they're seeing is real. It has a similarly disengaging effect.
No, not at all. This when the plot twist becomes apparent, like in Tale of Two Sisters or Sixth Sense, you're like, oh, okay. Now I know what's going on. I'm pissed off because you didn't tell me that before. And that would have been interesting, because you could have told us a great story about a ghost trying to go through his afterlife while not being able to interact with whomever. I think the actor there could have done a lot more work dramatically than just moping around for the entire film. But no, we don't go, oh, now I don't trust the camera anymore. We go, oh, now the story starts. Now I could actually like, oh, okay, this was a big lie you gave me.
Twist, since it confirms that the story. And it's pretty much impossible to take anything the story presents at face value anymore. Most of the time, this is a feature and not a bug, since this reveal usually hits when the story is already almost over, and it can be very cool for an audience to go back through a story like that and catch all the hints and double meanings they missed the first time through. If the story doesn't have to convince the audience that they're seeing something that's really definitely happening, it isn't a problem that they basically can't convince them anymore. But this can become an issue in serialized media or other long-form storytelling, because if the story gets too comfortable playing with the audience's perceptions of reality, then as mentioned, the audience is going to disinvest.
Well, that's why it works in a film like an hour and a half to 2 hours, because it's not too long for you to watch a film and go, okay, that was kind of silly, or oh, that was kind of cute, like with Memento. But
yeah, and she keeps saying it's a feature, not a bug. It's like you're not talking about a video game. You're talking about a movie or a book.
Where,
like if you're talking about a video game, then yes, you can use that terminology. It's a feature, not a bug. You can't use that when you're talking about a movie or a book.
yeah, if it's a bug in a writer that means he made a mistake. And if you're writing chapter upon chapter of like lie in a non-mystery novel, you're going to piss people off when they get the chapter reveal, whatever that is.
Yeah.
But,
And it's
oh
not
no,
about-
this is
yeah,
disheartening.
If it's a book, it's not a bug, it's a retcon.
Yeah, and if it's
Or
all a
whatever.
dream, like you're just immediately gonna piss people off.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so there's things you don't like. There's tropes that you just don't do, and all a dream is one of the bad ones. Same with the Deus Ex. You can do it properly, but in most cases it's usually a mistake. So same with Mary Sue. Like there's just no way around it. You can do it properly, just very hard, and it's not something to attempt for the sake of it. So no, a bug is definitely a mistake by the author. If you want to translate that.
Yeah, I think I can remember in anime, like the one episode that I really hate from Samurai Champloo is the one when they are on mushrooms, but that is only revealed at the end of the episode where they finally realize that the tunnel that they dug down to Edo period Japan was just a mushroom fever dream that they were having, all three of them. But like all three of them were having the same dream, so it really threw me off. Like 20 minutes out the window.
I think that's the infamous episode that everyone doesn't like.
Yes, because there's the mushroom episode and the baseball episode. And I always prefer the baseball because at least that happens.
Yeah, that one is a little weird. It's like what, baseball and 1700. What is the time period of that?
Late 1700s, yes.
Yeah.
And Americans arriving to Japan,
I
the
know.
Navy.
Watanabe likes to put in like freaking rap and music into his Japanese.
At least it was fun. Like, not just like, whoops, this didn't happen. Mushroom cloud.
Yeah.
Might literally refuse to believe its actor gets cute with it, as they so often do, like having a character snap out of a horrifying unreality into a scene where they're being rescued, which in turn dissolves into a horrifying unreality until they wake up to being rescued again, but for real this time. It's pretty understandable that both the characters and the audience might have a little trouble believing the story is actually ending the way it says it is. And
Yeah, but that's a horror film, right? It's supposed to make you scared. So there's nothing wrong with having a character who, they're dreaming of waking up, which is interesting because it's ironic that they're going to be waking up. And it ends up scaring the shit out of them because they have a nightmare.
Well, she had a nightmare.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, not a dream. It was a nightmare.
Exactly. So you can use things that are believable, like someone is dreaming, and it's a scary dream, and then, you understand where she's coming from when in reality she wakes up and the same scenario plays out, but she's thinking everyone's going to kill her or something.
Yeah, or she's still trapped on the ship.
Right. That's totally fine. I see nothing wrong with that technique within the proper context. And that's where it's like, oh, you're making a little omniscient view into the person's brain, the person's mind, that, okay, I'm going along for this ride. And oh my God, oh, it was fake. Oh, haha, funny. And then you understand her drama as a result. So that it still plays into the storytelling element or the focus of, rather the point of storytelling, which is to entertain and teach. And if you can entertain me with drama, great, it works. As opposed to lying to you for the sake of lying and saying, whoop, it was all a lie. Haha, I got you. And you're like, that doesn't give me anything. It doesn't make me happy. It's not clever.
Yeah, now I'm pissed off.
Yeah, you're not giving me anything I want by lying to me. That's what I'm trying to say. Like I'm not here to be lied to. That's essentially.
Fortunately, just like in all a dream scenarios, this is technically an interpretation that could be applied to literally any story ever. The idea that a story is being told by an unreliable narrator lying to the audience is technically always true, because the writer is lying to the audience by telling them a story in the first place. This is one of those foundational...
It's called fiction, you retard. You don't just say it's a lie.
You said the right word, Smud.
This is so stupid. Well, every story is a lie. No. We have fiction and nonfiction in the library for a reason.
My God.
When I read nonfiction, I expect it to be a frickin' police report or detective telling me XYZ happened, or an old veteran telling me what happened during the war or whatever the story is about. I do not expect to go into a fictitious book going, oh, well, this was clearly based on real events, 100%. It's like, no.
Yeah, imagine opening a fiction book, the first page, and it says, I'm going to level with you. This is all bullshit.
Yeah,
it's all a lie.
See, this is what I was bringing up. Ian M. Banks, he does that right at the end of his story, and you're like, oh, okay. So it's kind of like he's a good enough entertaining writer that it doesn't matter, but it's still one of those things you don't do. So either he was feeling tired, or the character of the narrator was like that kind of sap. You could chalk it up as one of those reasonings. But it's something you should probably never even imply. Like, imagine going to a restaurant and saying, we didn't put cyanide in today. It's like, whoa, what? That's not something to joke about. So, and cyanide is around in kitchens because you use them to kill rats and whatever. So, it's one of those things you don't talk about, or you should never make a joke about.
Elements of story, where if the writer an attack on suspension of disbelief
Wait, back up.
Disbelief. In order to fully
back
enjoy
up what she's saying here. Hold on. She mentions the fourth wall. If you poke it too much, what did she say about the fourth wall?
Let's try again.
Being told always true, because the writer is lying to the audience by telling them a story in the first place. This is one of those foundational elements of storytelling, like the fourth wall, where if the writer starts poking at it too hard, it can destabilize the storytelling process itself. It's literally an attack on suspension of disbelief. In order to fully enjoy...
Okay, I always bring this up because people just say suspension of disbelief. It's the willing suspension. You have to will yourself to say, oh, I'm watching a movie, oh, I'm reading a book, I'm engrossed in the story, things are happening, When you say, oh, that was all a dream, you're like, okay, why did you waste my time? Why did I go through that with you? And why sorry to cut you off. I don't understand what breaking the fourth wall and suspension of disbelief have to do with each other, because like breaking the fourth wall means the character is talking to the audience. Deadpool is a famous example of that. It's the most infamous example of breaking the fourth wall. Suspension of disbelief is like, okay, I'm going to buy what you're saying to me. It doesn't make sense in my head, but I'm going to go with it anyway, just because I'm having fun. Yeah. This is the same we talk about.
Those two things are not related.
Yeah, exactly. We talk about with...
But she's saying it is. It's like, no, it's not.
Yeah. I'm not sure what she's getting at. I was going to say an aside is a little inner monologue like we have with Deadpool or Shylock and the Merchant of Venice, where it's just, I'm going to pause or just step out of the world and into the spotlight for a few seconds to say what's in my mind and then step right back into the story. That is not necessarily a breaks your willing suspension of disbelief, because you know what he's doing. You just suddenly have a view into this person's character or their thoughts.
Right. Or they're telling a joke. They make a joke to the audience. It's like, like
Yeah.
Deadpool or like you just said, that book, what was another one? Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Yeah.
He talks to the audience all the time, but he still stays in the narrative.
Right. So the world around him just sort of like just either lets go or pauses. While he says his bit. So
Right.
You could call that a fourth wall bend or a fourth wall break. It's not that, it doesn't break my entire opinion of the matter, but that's a different technique than the concept of having an unreliable narrator. To me, a narrator is just a guy, a perspective of a story, someone telling the story. That's it.
Yeah, it's not changing the narrative.
No, when you say it's a lie, all you're saying is, oh, that was made up. I didn't mean to say that. Or, ha ha, I got you. Here's what really happened. Like there has to be a reason for that. And if there is no reason aside from I'm being clever, then you're just pissing me off. You're not breaking my willing suspension of disbelief. You're just going, wait a second, what are we doing here? What's the point of this? So this is the problem with time. If you just tell me something like I don't know, we've got Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and we have a animation interlude, and then the animator died of a heart attack. You're like, oh, okay, or the animators have all been sacked, or it's like okay, like it's there to you stop the narration just to tell a joke. It's a comedy. The whole point of the show is to laugh. That's a way of making you laugh. Let's go back to the narrative originally. So if the purpose is comedy, like in Deadpool, it's great. It's fine.
Yep.
But I still believe that the world of King Arthur and all those crazy people he follows with in Monty Python, Quest for the Holy Grail, is actually happening. It's right at the end where the cops come in and start apprehending everyone. You're like, what the hell is going on?
Yep, it's a literal cop out.
Yeah. So that's where you would go, oh, okay, they're just goofing up and they don't know how to end the movie.
Yeah, they're poking fun at themselves, and
yeah,
you're not meant to take it seriously. Monty Python, anyway.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
On the fact that the story doesn't necessarily make 100% sense or isn't 100% convincing in the effects department. The story could be critiqued or nitpicked for errors or speculative fantasy that doesn't necessarily make sense, but doing so damages the audience's ability to take the story at face value. So when an audience suspends their disbelief, they're choosing not to do that in order to remain immersed in the story. This is why things can get tricky when the story tells the audience that they should have been disbelieving them the whole time because actually the story was a lie. It can be an exciting and unusual approach to storytelling because it directly...
Yeah, so I need more examples. Again, when we're talking about first-person perspectives, like Never Let Me Go, where the girl isn't lying to us. She just has it's a limited first-person view of the world she's in. All she knows, she's just a schoolgirl. She has no idea what's outside the world of her school because she grew up there. So she doesn't know exactly what's going on. It's not a lie. It's just a limited understanding. And then when the world opens up, you go, oh, this is what's happening in this weird dystopian future. Because all we were shown was a bunch of high school drama between boys and girls and growing up and coming of age, which you can get just about anywhere. So that's an unreliable narrator, but it's not bad. It's not a lie. It's just limited. So if you are literally saying half a story is the first part is a dream, that's a shit story. I don't know any story that does that works. So you really have to know what you're doing with your narrative. And she is not giving me an example I could latch onto to say, okay, how does this work?
Encourage to critically examine what they're seeing rather than take that. Directly encourages the audience to critically examine what they're seeing rather than taking the characters at face value. But if they take that far enough, or rather if the writer directs them to take that far enough, the audience's ability to stay immersed can be deeply compromised. In the end, the audience won't know when to trust the story, and if the story does something they dislike, they might choose to believe that it was a lie too. If the author makes too much of their story a canonical lie, they lose the ability to control the audience's belief in what they're telling them. So, yeah.
So, what? Wait, what was the point of that?
Just end it there.
Nothing.
You can't just end it there. Oh my God, I was right. She is an unreliable narrator.
She could have been talking about
I said that as a joke.
Yeah, she could have been talking about fourth wall breaks, and then the narrator or whatever she was trying to tell us would have been exactly the same. Because if you keep doing it, you're not going to trust the narration, and therefore people aren't going to like it. It's like, yeah, same with It's All a Dream, or I lied to you. Or whatever the case may be. Oh. I don't know. This is like describing the color of the ocean in 2,000 words. Anyway, let's get to some super chats, and then we'll get to some memes, and we'll call it a day. The Copperell, thank you, sir. Oh my God, I'm missing another red video.
If you could say that.
Yeah.
No, you were blessed to miss this.
God of War Judgment has goals that change the narrative. Is it God of War Judgment? Is that a thing?
Apparently.
GOW Judgment? Is that a game? What is that? Does anyone know?
Doesn't sound familiar.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. GOW. Oh, Gears of War Judgment. Oh.
Gears of
okay.
War Judgment. Okay.
GOW, I was like, that's God of War, right? Okay. Anyway. I think someone gave a tip. Oh, it was a Giga Chad. Thank you, Giga Chad. It's so weird how she's making all these definitive declarative statements on how to present the story and how things can get messy. But a minute ago, she was talking about how character attributes like beauty and ugliness are subjective. Am I tripping here? I think she started with the concept that first-person views are subjective, and the narrator can be unsure of themselves or just a person, so they don't have all knowledge, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that. So to imply that with the third person is the problem. And when you do fancy stuff, like in Brothers Karamazov, where the first person is a writer, and he's apparently is a very good writer, and he tells you that, and then he gets into the minds of other characters and starts sounding like them. You're like, whoa, who's talking? Like you get a little confused as to what's happening with the voice of the narrator. Is it him anymore? Is he acting out the other character? Has he become the other character? And you could deduce that he's just making this shit up. This is not real. But luckily that never happens. So Dostoevsky knows what he's doing. Anyway, let's go to stream names. If we have any, of course.
There's a few.
Yeah.
Alrighty, here we go. Cowboy Bebop. Overly Sarcastic Productions. Here at Overly Sarcastic Productions, we would like to salute the Israeli Mossad for destroying 3 towers on 9/11.
What the fuck?
What?
Who is B?
All right.
Is that Blue?
Yeah, Blue. Yeah, they do a dash B or R to clarify like which one of them is talking instead of making a separate Twitter account.
Okay.
Strange.
I hope this is a joke.
All right.
Gentlemen, it is with great sadness to inform you that women... Oh. The look I give Red when she asked me to take her word salad horseshit seriously. Okay. Donkey.
That's right.
She has her uses. This is just not one of them. You are in her DMs. I am in her septic tank. What the...
Okay.
What is
All
that
right.
imply? What is happening?
Yeah.
It's not a bug. It's a feature. Oh. That's great.
Hmm.
I like that. Actually, you know what? That would be kind of useful, actually. Yeah. Oh shit! It's a woman. This is the memes we get. A woman is talking about the narrative of a story or movie. Oh god, here we go.
But there's so little to talk about this video because like it's just so mind-bogglingly confusing. Like the kind of speech that she's applying here.
Yeah, this could have been a 5-minute video talking about tense and tone and style and giving examples of style.
Yes.
And
Instead, it's just what I even forgot the Carlin's name, like Steven Universe.
yeah, I was gonna say Steven Universe, the
And
Marvel
the Owl
film.
House,
Yeah,
like all these wonderful pieces of media.
yeah. She should have given examples of, let's say, the Princess Bride frame narrative, where she showed that for a few seconds, like, oh yeah, it's
Yeah.
a joke about censorship or whatever. It's like whatever, yeah. But show actual classic books. Show the films that I mentioned. That, well, unless she has better examples of the narrative lying to you specifically for a narrative reason, that you say, how does that work? Why does it work? Why doesn't it work? Why your mileage may vary depending on whether you are invested in that story or not. Because a lot of people liked Memento until you get to the end and you understand what he did. And he essentially committed murder to facilitate his disease, which is he doesn't have a memory past 10 minutes. or long-term memory past 10 minutes. So he's in perpetual state of, I got to find my murderer. I got to find my killer, my wife. And he's like that every day of his life, from every hour of his life. Even though he supposedly told himself he killed his murderer, even though he made a lie. So he's lying to himself just to I don't know, that the momentary desire to facilitate his revenge. So that's what pissed me off with Memento, even though it was a fascinating film. So there's lots of reasons to like and dislike a film when they do weird things like lying to you, but for the most part, it should be avoided, whether it's a book, a movie. These are difficult techniques, and unless you're doing murder mystery or a mystery film or mystery story, I would not recommend this in general unless you're really good at writing and you know what the hell you're talking about and you know why people are watching or reading your book. So, yeah, no, I would have appreciated some actual logic and reason and examples that outside of just reading TV tropes or whatever she did in this case. So,
Yeah.
I haven't learned much, guys, sadly. I've merely reaffirmed what I already knew, which it's kind of like I know how to run like 100 miles, and this person's explaining how to run one, and I'm like, you're not wrong, but that's like I'm well past that. I've far exceeded these techniques you're trying to teach me. And I think most people have as well. Anyway. Thank you, guys. That was Friday. A very relaxing 1 hour of us trying to figure out what the hell she's talking about. Oh man, I could take this apart with her if she was around, but I doubt we'll ever get a chance to talk to her, and that's okay. I'm not hung up.
She doesn't really want to communicate. Like, she just accepts it. Like she's just the person that you need to go to for these opinions.
Random. Go to the. Is there a random page selector on TV Trope? You just randomly do that. That's all you have to do.
I think there's a button. Like last few years, I managed to like find one.
Just find a random page on TV Tropes and just read that, and that'll be more than enough data on a technique if you're curious. But this is not a trope.
It's not.
This is like saying it's more like a camera technique, like a framing technique. Choosing your voice, choosing your narrative style. It's like you. It's like saying, are you a trope? No, you're a writer. You're a person telling a story. It's not a pattern in storytelling. It is the storyteller itself choosing a perspective. That's all. So we talk about tropes. We talk about content and technique, not the style. Style is framework. Style is framework. When you frame a story, you are doing a style. You're choosing a style, you're framing a story in that way. So focus on your voice, focus on your style, focus on what you're trying to say in the cleanest possible way. And that's why I want clarity to be your number one in storytelling, not patterns or techniques or content. That's up to you. But keep clarity number one. I avoid Deus Exes and Mary Sue's and whatever narrative voice that lies to your audience is. So anyway, thanks so much, guys. Have yourself a great evening. Talk to you soon.